One of the most frustrating things I see in the clinic is when somebody's doing everything right and their progress just seems to stop. They're consistent with their exercises, they're careful with their loads, they're trying to do everything correct, but still they hit a wall. And that moment usually gets misinterpreted. So most people assume that if they've made improvement, that they've solved their problem. So when it stops or it slows down, they think something's wrong, either with them or with whatever program they're doing. But clinically, that's usually not what's happening. What's happening is that the body has moved into a different phase of recovery. So the way I simplify this in practice is two pieces. First, there's the healing process itself, and second, it's the body's ability to tolerate load again. And those two things don't always progress at the same speed. And this mismatch is usually where people get caught. So let's talk about the healing process first. So it's more than just tissue repair. There's pain relief, there's movement improvement, but basically the internal recovery process is moving along and it is healed to a point that the tissue is now becoming more whole. This includes things like inflammation, energy, and just general system recovery like muscle control, coordination, balance, things like that. But the body sometimes looks better before it fully heals. Once it does heal, then we move on to the second layer, which is what's called capacity. So this is where I see most people plateau. So even if the body is fully healed, it still has to rebuild its tolerance to real world loads. I often explain this like material being re-stressed. So for example, think of a hole in your wall and you cover it with spackle. Oh, it's covered, but it's not really ready for paint or hanging a picture frame on it. You have to wait for it to harden and dry out. You might have to sand it down a little bit. That's the load capacity phase. That's what exercise dosing does. It's not fixing it, it's rebuilding how much stress the system can take without reacting. Where most people get confused is they feel better early on, so they assume I'm done. I can go back to doing everything I used to do. But improvement in symptoms is not the same thing as restoring capacity. It's more like the warning light shutting off before the system's actually running again. So in the clinic, we see this pattern repeat. They get better for a couple of weeks. They feel like everything is working right. Everything goes back to normal and they're walking more, they're working more, they're back to the gym and training. And all of a sudden, the same area gets reactive again. More inflammation, more pain. And that's usually where they start changing their program or trying to do different or new things. But the issue isn't that nothing's working. It's that the system hasn't fully gone back to tolerance. You can't handle the loads yet. So I usually compare a lot of things in the clinic to analogies people can visualize and understand. And one of them I use is pizza dough. So if you stretch it too hard, it tears. If you don't stretch it enough over time, it gets tight and shrinks back down. So you have to apply the forces gradually. You have to give it repeated exposure, and then it becomes more like what you want it to be, a pizza. This is what rehab's trying to do, but there's two phases. So when I look at recovery, I don't just look at it as healing the injury. I have to think of it as rebuilding a system that can tolerate the forces of life again. So those two things, healing and capacity, don't always move together at the same speed. Current biohacking and technology, we try to use all these cool tools like hyperbarics and red lights and massage guns and all these other tools to support you in your healing process. But those are the healing side. They don't always replace load progression. So when progress stops, it's not usually because nothing's working. It's usually because the healing has improved, but capacity hasn't caught up yet. And until it does, the body can't consistently handle your normal life stresses. And that's where most rehabs stall. So if you only focus on pain and your short-term rehab goals, you're going to miss the part that actually determines your long-term durability. You end up treating the symptoms instead of rebuilding the system. So that's what we'll break down in the next video.